right on schedule, the 7:45 MBTA commuter train arrives at Wickford Junction, where more than 24 passengers hop on for the ride north. Some heading to Warwick or Providence, others all the way up to Boston. The rail service began with great fanfare a year ago, the culmination of more than a decade of planning, and a $44 million investment by taxpayers to build the station and an adjacent 4-story, 1,100-car parking garage. The garage itself accounted for $25 million of the total cost. A year later, the MBTA-run service is attracting about 200 daily riders, most going to Boston. But just 80 people a day are paying the $4 parking rate needed to help offset a $500,000 annual bill to maintain the mammoth garage. The state needs 500 vehicles parking and paying daily to break even.
On the good news side, the people that are using it absolutely love it, which is what we anticipated. You can work, you can read, you can sleep, you can converse, you can do whatever. You're not focusing on the driving, and you don't have all the stresses of driving.
Rhode Island Department of Transportation Director Michael Lewis says the commuter rail service is very much a work in progress, but he's satisfied so far with the numbers the trains are drawing most weekdays. There is no weekend service.
The total numbers that are using it are less than we had hoped in the early years, and we always knew this is going to take time, and I'm not talking months. This is years to have the ridership grow to what the predictions were back when the project was planned.
Those predictions are that 1,500 passengers will be riding daily out of Wickford Junction within 7 years, and 3/4 of them will pay to park.
But our estimates, with the growth and with the employment growth expected in the Providence area and in the state over time, again, those 2020 projections will be that the parking garage will be virtually full.
It is a long way off from what we saw at the garage last week. On one day, there were a total of 71 cars on the first and second levels. The third level and the fourth, which is an outside deck, were totally empty. Lewis says Wickford Junction is where the Providence train station was, with MBTA commuter rail service to Boston when it first started in the late 80s. And he's confident one day it will be where the Providence service is now.
For the first 10 years or so, it was very flat growth, and then in the late 90s, it just picked up astronomically. Now it's one of the highest, highest riderships on the MBTA service, and we see that kind of growth in the extension over time when people get used to it.
It is taxpayers, though, who will have to pick up the tab until then. That's because the state has a contract with a private company to maintain the garage. Lewis says the price is about $45,000 a month, more than $500,000 a year. It is a beautifully landscaped facility with extensive shrubbery, lush grass, and flowers planted around the garage. The interior of the garage is immaculate and looks much the way it did a year ago when it first opened. But DOT figures show revenues generated by parking and concessions brought in just under $58,000 over the first 12 months, which means a federal grant the state secured had to pick up the remaining $442,000 in maintenance costs. That grant will run out within a year. The revenue figures were lower than expected because the DOT offered free parking and rides on Wednesdays during February and March. One of the promotions Lewis is hoping will bring in more passengers.
We have to market this better. We still have to there's a lot of people that still aren't aware that it exists.
So in effect, give them a little taste of the ice cream so they'll buy the half gallon eventually.
Right.
What's going to make somebody a year, 2, 3 years down the line, as opposed to in that first year with all the publicity, say, I'm hopping the train at Wickford, and not only that, I'm going to park in the garage.
Couple things drive that. First of all, we are creatures of habit. If we are used to getting to work in our cars, that's just it's like inertia. It takes something to change. That changes over time. Things that drive that, the initial pop, as you're talking about, but then it's fuel prices, it's congestion, it's convenience, and those things, as the economy rebounds and we start to get more of the congestion back on 95, then you're going to see more of an impetus of people saying, you know what, I'm just not going to deal with the Thurber-Zapp curve anymore.
Lewis says there are also many passengers who are dropped off and don't pay for parking, something we saw frequently on our visits to the station last week. And one day, dozens of kids from a local elementary school in North Kingstown arrived for a field trip to Boston, an ideal use for the train service. But most of those who came did not use the parking garage.
You seem like the manager who's looking at a 9-inning game and isn't worried about his pitcher getting rocked in the first couple of innings, that you have the other 7. Is that an analogy?
I think that's a pretty good analogy. It doesn't mean that when somebody hits a triple off your starter, you're wondering like, was this a good call?
But it's likely to be years down the line before we know for sure. In Wickford, Jim Hummel for the Hummel Report.